Her name was Vivian Baxter. You may have never heard of her before. I hadn't until a couple of weeks ago. But I'll tell you, the people who lived around her in her community, they knew her. They knew her as a troublemaker. You see, Vivian Baxter was always losing her job. She'd get arrested from time to time. Vivian Baxter was an African-American woman living in the 1940s and 50s and 60s and fighting for social justice. We would call her a civil rights activist, but in her day, she was just known as a troublemaker. And you see, Vivian wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for those around her without a voice. She would see abuse or someone who would have their rights just trampled on, and she would jump into the fray. And her family and her friends would say, "Why do you do that, Vivian? Why are you always fighting somebody else's battle? Don't you have enough trouble of your own?" And anyway, you're the one who ends up getting fired, and nothing ever changes. But Vivian Baxter had a young daughter. And she would come home at night and she would tell her daughter, "You know, honey, I know you think nothing ever changes, but let me tell you, when you fight for what is right, everything changes. When you see injustice and you call it out, you tell the world that's not right. And when you see someone who is being abused and you stand up for them, what you're saying is that, hey, you matter. You matter to me, and I'm willing to fight for you." Yes, Vivian Baxter's daughter would hear a lot of wisdom as she grew up. One of her favorite memories is what happened every time they walked out the front door. Vivian Baxter would grab her daughter's hand and stop right there in the front door, and she would say, "See that doorstep? Justice starts right there at our doorstep. Because when we walk out of this house, we decide right out of the chute, what are we willing to fight for and what are we willing to ignore?" Vivian Baxter's daughter was Maya Angelou. Now that's a name you should know. Maya Angelou was one of the most influential women of our time. She is an award-winning, groundbreaking author with her book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She was a poet. She was mostly a civil rights activist, and she would take the power that she gained as a writer and take her fight for justice onto the global stage. Powerful women, influential women. That's what we're talking about today on this Mother's Day. We continue as a church our focus effort on the unsung heroes of the Bible. And all week long in our study groups and in our devotions, we've been talking about Esther, Queen Esther, the queen who risked her life and saved her people. Oh, but there's so much more to the story of Esther than just that. You see, Esther begins the story as a poor orphan in exile. She has no parents. She's gone to live with her uncle Mordecai. And they're living in Persia. The Jews are all in exile. But the king is looking for a new queen. And Esther is so beautiful. She is taken from her home. She is taken from her uncle and put into the harem of the king. She does not apply for that job. She doesn't ask for that. She is taken. She is, at this point in her life, a pawn in some scheme that will give the king some kind of pleasure and hopefully help the king find a queen. And one by one, the girls from the harem are taken to the king. They spend the night with him, and then they're put off into a different place, never to marry again, but probably never to come back to the king again either. Except when Esther comes to the king. He falls in love with her. He finds love there. She brings something else into the king, something special. And he falls in love with her, and he crowns her his queen. She is now the queen. But there's something else happening there in Persia. You see, no one knows that the queen is Jewish. The king doesn't know that. No one at court knows that. And Mordecai has become, her uncle has become, he's gotten some power. He is now working at the court. And the Jews of the day are, well, they're trying to live a little under the radar, right? They're trying not to make not to make a scene, not to be called out. But that's never the way it goes. You know, it never happens that way. When we are following the path that God has for us, it often separates us out. I mean, once we know the confidence and the empowerment of living the life that God has planned for us, well, it does look different to some of those around us. Just like Vivian Baxter's friends, what she did looked crazy to them. And sometimes when we are living as God called us to live, it looks crazy to the world around us. And there's always someone who wants to take us down a notch or two, right? That's how it was for Mordecai. A man named Haman saw him and thought, he's just getting a little too uppity. He won't even bow to me. So Haman sets out to take old Mordecai down a notch or two. Actually, to kill him, not only kill him, but I'm going to wipe out all of the Jews in the process. Again, often in this world, even for you and me, sometimes when we are doing what we believe is right, what we believe God has called us to do, we're called out in a negative way. I remember once I had a boss call me into his office, look me right in the face and say, are you one of those do-gooders? Because we don't have any place for that here. May we all be called a do-gooder from time to time. I hope that none of us are ever feel like we can't be the people that God is calling us to be or do the things that God is calling us to do because we're too concerned about what the world around us might say. But so it was in the land of Persia at the time of Mordecai and Esther. Yes, Haman wanted to destroy the Jews. He was going to wipe them out. We're talking about genocide here. Now again, remember, the king doesn't know that Esther is a Jew. But Mordecai sends word to her and he tells her what's coming. There's a law. Haman has tricked the king into signing this law that he can do with the Jews whatever he wants and he's going to kill them. So Mordecai sends word to Esther and he says, it's up to you. It's all up to you. You've got to go to the king and you've got to plead for us. It's our only hope. Now Esther sends back word to Mordecai, reminding him that although she's the queen, she doesn't exactly have a lot of power in this. She is still pretty much a pawn in this scheme right now. Because the rule is, the law is that if you go before the king and you haven't been invited, the penalty for that is death. So for her to go and get the king's attention when she hasn't been asked risks her life. And oh, by the way, she hasn't been to see the king in 30 days. So it's not like she saw him yesterday and she's going to come around. No, she hasn't seen the king. He hasn't asked for her in 30 days. So for her to go to him now, there's a big risk in that. There's a big risk in that. And so she tells Mordecai that, and boy, he comes right back at her. And I tell you, he lays it on pretty thick. He says, well, listen, if you think you're going to be safe here when he starts killing the Jews, think again. You won't be safe in the court. You'll be killed just like everybody else. Hey, God will take care of the Jews, but you and your family, you'll be killed for sure. And oh, by the way, don't you think that maybe you were put into this royal place for such a time as this? There it is. There's that line that we use all the time out of Esther. For such a time as this. We are in this place for such a time as this. And so Esther says, okay. John Wesley would say, we should, every one of us, consider for what end God has put us into the place that we are. Why are we in such a place as this, in such a time as this? And when opportunity offers a serving God in our generation, we must take care not to let it slip. I didn't read that very well. Let me read that again. This is a quote from John Wesley. We should, every one of us, consider for what end God has put us into the place where we are. And when an opportunity offers of serving God in our generation, we must take care not to let it slip. This is not some fatalistic predestination kind of thing where we have been put here so that we will do this. No, what it's saying is when we are living the lives that God intended for us, we will find ourselves in moments of divine opportunity. And by divine opportunity, we mean a chance to advance God's kingdom in this world. It's not that we have no choice in it. Esther had a choice, we have a choice. But what John Wesley is saying is when we find ourselves in these moments of divine opportunity, don't let it slip away. Don't let it slip away. Know the power that each of us has, the divine power that can respond to the divine opportunities that come our way. And well, what happens when divine power, and I'm talking about the power that's in each and every one of us, the power of the living God inside of us. What happens when that power meets divine opportunity to change the world? Well, you get empowerment. You get confidence and empowerment, and that's what Esther has. I have to tell you, it flips right there. When Esther says, yeah, I'm going to do this, everything changes. Esther is no longer a pawn in this scheme. Esther takes control. She says, I'll do this. I'll go to the king, but we're going to do this my way. I'm going to tell you, Mordecai, and you get all the Jews together. I want you all to pray for 3 days, pray and fast. And I'm going to do that here with the women around me. We're going to pray and we're going to fast. And then Mordecai has told her, hey, go straight to the king and ask him this quickly before anything happens. And no. She says, I'm going to do this my way. And she strategizes and she comes up with a plan. And it's a plan for a series of dinners. And she finally gets to the point where she doesn't ask the king for anything. He asks her. He says to her, what can I give you? I'll give you half of everything I have. What can I do for you? And there it is. There's her chance to say, give me my life and the lives of my people. How smart is that? This empowered woman making a strategy, planning it out. Wow, what a story. What happens when our divine power meets the divine opportunity? What happens? Amazing things. The kingdom of God moves forward as it has intended to do all along. But I have to tell you, one of the most fascinating parts of this Esther story for me is that in this story, in this entire book of Esther, the word God is not mentioned once. Now, it's inferred, of course. They're going to go pray, and we know they're Jews and they're praying to God. But the word God, Yahweh, any representation of God, is not mentioned once. Not only that, there is no nature-defying miracle in this story. There's no burning bush. There's no parting of the seas. There's no bread multiplied. None of that. No. The miracle in this story is the recognition of the divine in humanity. The miracle of this story is a young girl who finds her power and seizes the divine opportunity that God has put in front of her. Oh, yeah. The story of Esther reminds us that the power of the living God is in each and every one of us. Jesus says it. Hey, when you figure this out, you can do the very things that I'm doing. You have that power, the divine power in each and every one of us. It's the power to change the world in big ways and small ways. Again, as Vivian Baxter would tell her daughter, you may not see the change. I may not see the change. God sees the change. And the world feels the change when we do the right thing. Each one of us has unique powers. We have unique gifts and opportunities. At the age of 92, our own Jenny Bortz. Well, I tell you, Jenny has a power that few people have. Jenny can make you laugh. Now, Jenny, of course, is loving and caring and kind. But when she sees you, her special power is she can make you laugh. I don't know if you've ever heard her speak at a funeral, but even in those moments where we are all sad and where we actually need a laugh, Jenny can find a way to appropriately make us laugh. That's her superpower. That is her power. I called her and I asked her how she was handling the quarantine, and she told me that in the early days of the quarantine, she was really struggling because she's used to being out and about and she is sheltering alone. But she said to herself one day, that's enough of that. And she took her power and was empowered in a divine moment of opportunity, and she made a plan. Just like Esther, she made a plan. And she said, every day when I wake up, I'm going to make 3 phone calls. I'm going to call somebody from my church family, I'm going to call someone from my family, and I'm going to call someone from my circle of friends every day. Every day. And I'm going to make them laugh. And I'm going to bring some joy to them. And Jenny would start this calling, and they would start to call her back, and then she would encourage them to call others, and it would just grow from that. She still does that every day. And let me tell you what happens as that ripples out. One day, a woman called Jenny who didn't know her very well, but she called her and she said, well, I've heard you're somebody that I can talk to. I've heard that you're somebody who will listen to me and hopefully make me laugh, because I will tell you, I am right on the edge. I am slipping down the rabbit hole of depression. I need someone to listen, and I need some joy in my life. And Jenny said, well, hang on. And for the next half hour, they talked, and Jenny listened, and then she told a couple of her jokes and a couple of her stories, and at the end, she had this woman laughing. Oh, she had her laughing. It is the power of using that God-given gift that we have. When we use that in these divine moments, talk about a divine opportunity. A woman who's slipping over the edge calls a woman who can make her laugh. It's hope for the hopeless. It's joy in the midst of feeling trapped and alone. That is power. Do you sometimes feel powerless and alone in this quarantine? It's hard not to. Think about Esther, though. Think about how she must have felt so powerless with all the things that were going on around her. And yet she found her unique gifts. And let me tell you, Esther's gift was not her beauty. Esther's gift was her courage, her bravery, and her strategic planning. I mean, Esther knew how to put together a plan. And finally, I believe that one of Esther's superpowers was her ability to love. She must have taken that kind of love into the king, because we see the king change. We see the king recognizing love, and by the end of the story, he's talked about as a great king. So Esther finds her superpower in the midst of struggle, in the midst of feeling powerless. Yes, divine opportunity never comes without struggle, people. It doesn't. Divine opportunity to change the world and do what's right in the world never comes without risk. We risk calling someone who may not really want us to call them, and that's okay too. We may risk going out and calling on someone or sending someone a card who didn't really want a card from us. We may risk something here, but let me stop and say that I don't believe that God calls us to take silly risk or risk that can be harmful to us. I believe in the confine, we see that in Esther. I mean, God did not call her to race over to the king. I mean, that would have been foolish. God does not call us to take foolish risks, to go out and randomly call on folks or go to the stores or go to places where we shouldn't be right now. God will show us opportunities within the confines of the world that we are right now. Get strategic. Look at your own plan. But first of all, think about your unique gift. What is your superpower? What is that superpower that you have? Think about that. Claim that power. Take that into the divine opportunity that God opens up for each one of us every day. Ask yourself, how can I use the God-given gifts that I have in the confines of this quarantine? What can I be doing? Where can God use me today? As John Wesley said, don't let it slip away. Each one of us has these opportunities that come to us. Know them for what they are. Know your own superpower. Know the power that you have, the power of the living God inside you and inside me. Let's take that out into the world. People, that's how we change the world. That's how we make this world a better place. And oh my gosh, if we're talking about for such a time as this, look around us, people. There have never been so many people unemployed, so many people sad, so many people who need food. For such a time as this, we need everything that we can bring to this place, everything that we can bring to this time. And God has it. God's got this covered. We just need to open up and allow him to move through us, with us. Don't be afraid. It's not going to come without struggle. It's not going to come without risk, but God never asks us to take foolish risk either. Open your heart and your mind. Move forward on this Mother's Day. Move forward claiming the power of the living God inside each one of us. And take that out. Meet the divine opportunity of today. Feel the empowerment of living the lives we were meant to live. Amen.